let's talk about change and what is organizational change? What is organizational change? And let's start defining that. I like this simple definition. It's how we do things around here. It's just basically that. How people behave in organizations. So a bit more technical, the assumptions, values, and beliefs that drive behavior in an organization. So it's how people talk, communicate, and cooperate, make decisions, just basically how things are done, okay? Very, very simple. So why is this important? Because many times the way we work, the behaviors we see in organizations, what we call the culture, the organizational culture, is not necessarily the best or what we need to thrive in this very complex marketplace and very fast-moving marketplace, in this VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So what are the challenges of organizational change? And anybody knows what this 70% could mean? Culture change is difficult. About 70% of culture change initiatives fail. That's 7 out of 10. That's the great majority. There are different studies, some even put that number up to 90%. I've been conservative, but definitely 1 out of 3, 66% of initiatives, of culture change initiatives fail. The question is, why do you think that is? Why don't you take 30 seconds and talk to somebody next to you and just create 1 or 2 ideas of why culture change initiatives are so difficult. Why do they fail? 1 or 2 ideas. Just take 30 seconds.
Ara li vaig a dir.
Massa a prop està? Me'l baixo una mica, si vols. Sí, me'l baixo una mica. Joan, baixa-me'l, baixa-me'l. Okay. Let's get back together here. Just, I'd like to get three ideas, three key words. Yes. Hold on, because I think we want to, sorry, it's going to be a bit slower, but we want to record. We are recording everything, so the video is going to be available to all of you afterwards, I think through the portal of the university. So it's better to record it. Thank you.
I believe one of the challenges to change is the fact that people haven't done something before. People reject what they haven't done before and believe it isn't possible.
Okay, so something new and people reject or resist, and we'll talk about resistance. Thank you. Somebody else, just could be 1 word, 1 concept, 1 idea. By the way, as we mentioned before, feel free to do those interventions in Catalan or in Spanish if you don't feel comfortable doing them in English. That would be okay.
The change is very needed, but it doesn't come fast enough, so the organization dies.
Okay, so it's basically the speed of the change, and it's not fast enough. Thank you. 1 more. 1 more concept, 1 more word. Eva, here in the front. I know some of you, very few.
So change will have to be made within a concept, within a society, within a larger organization. And it would have to be a systemic change, so all of it would have to change.
Okay.
And because it's not done that way, it takes more time.
Great. So the system has to change around. Perfect. So change is difficult. It's very difficult to think of organizations that do not have to change. Most organizations, public or private, have to change to adapt to the new challenges of the world. And what I'm going to do here is present you 3 models in my speech, 3 models I developed throughout my career about how to make less companies fail. So instead of 70%, maybe 30%, or just better ratio, a better number. So 3 models that could be considered as best practices for change, okay? Most organizations have a vision of where they want to be in 3 to 5 years, a strategic vision of the future. If an organization doesn't have a strategic vision in 3 to 5 years, that's a bigger problem. Most people have them. A lot of times, if the company is small, it resides in the head of the owner, of the leader. But in most cases, it exists explicitly or implicitly, that strategic vision. Also, most companies have a strategic plan or the path how to get from today to that strategic vision. Until here, no problem. The problem becomes when our culture today, remember, is just the way people behave in the organization. It's not including the strategic vision. The strategic vision is outside of how we do business today. So you need a new culture. And that's important. I put in the model necessary culture versus desired culture. Because desired could be like, I want that culture because I like it. No, it's necessary to survive. So I'm talking about necessity to fulfill that vision. It is possible that there is no culture change shift and that today's culture is the same as the necessary culture. Let me put you an example. If I'm Google and I decide after a few years of existence that I want to develop the smart car, the self-driven car, it's very possible I don't have to change anything in my culture, the way I cooperate, I make decisions to be successful at that project. And that would be this case. My challenge, my vision of the future for that project resides within my culture. It is also possible that is very far away. I live in a culture that has developed over years, a corporate culture, that is very different from the culture I need to survive. And then I would need several steps. But in most cases, we could represent what a company needs by this diagram, which means that there is some things we want to preserve, some things we want to continue doing, right? Some things we need to start doing, some things we need to let go of. And so the let go of is stop, the leverage is the continue, and the embrace is the start. Start, stop, continue. It's easy to remember. And this is a model that I use with the leaders of the organization. And this is one example. It's easier to understand it from a practical point of view. So I work with an organization in the US that basically when we worked with the senior team and looked at what type of culture do we have, they said we are conservative and quiet. We are a culture of fear and distrust. Actually, there were a lot of layoffs. They were closing factories. So people had actually fear of losing their jobs. I'm focused and complex. The processes have grown over the years to be very complex and cumbersome. I'm focused because they were invested in many markets, but they were not strong in any market, so on and so forth. This is just one example. And they wanted to be, or they needed to be, simple customer intimacy, so close to the customer, empowerment. Those are words that the SLT decides. So it's not that it needs to fit within a certain structure. You could put anything you want. Synergy and innovation across strategic business units, etc. And so in one diagram, you could see how big the cultural shift is. From this side, you want to let go fear, risk aversion, silos, and you want to embrace simplicity, synergy, collaboration, whatever it is. You want to continue, in this case, being a fast follower and cooperation, because they were doing that and they said, that's good, so let's keep that one. Let's not forget that. Okay? At the bottom, I put the values because they just help get the picture together. So if that's the culture change that we need, if we need to foster a culture of simplicity and customer intimacy, as an example, what do we do next? Where do we start? This is a formula that Dan Miller uses, and I like it a lot. It's very simple, and it basically talks about the resistance to change. And the resistance to change, it says, is very big, and it needs to be smaller than the multiplication of these three factors: dissatisfaction, vision, and first steps. And the formula is such that if one of these three factors, dissatisfaction, vision, and the first steps, a plan to do it, are small or close to zero, even if the other ones are high, the product is going to be very small. So for instance, even if you have a vision of the future and you have a plan to get there, if there is not a big sense of urgency or a big dissatisfaction of the status quo, the resistance is going to be too much, too big. Okay? Let me look at another model that basically talks about what needs to happen to tilt from one culture to the other. I call it the teeter-totter model. I think it would be the balancí in Catalan, this thing that is in the parks. And so the yellow guy wants to be heavier than the blue guy, and you see that that's not moving. And so this model says those are the critical steps that you need to follow to basically achieve a culture change. And you start with a vision, a leadership with a vision. We talked about that. What's the next step? After having a vision, what do you think is the next step? Think about it. It's a rhetorical question at this point. Think about it. What is the next step? A lot of times people jump into communication. Communicate, communicate, communicate. That's what a lot of consultants say. Yeah? It's something that needs to happen before communication. The brain juices are working? Okay. Strategy? Yeah? Vision, strategy. So one of the things that need to happen that we neglect many, many, many times is the SLT is short for senior leadership team, like the executive team. So the executive team dialogues. Dialogues, it's already tricky because dialogues means that I talk, but I listen. It's a dialogue, and most of the times I talk and I don't listen. So that's already a tricky one. Second one is trust. Trust each other. And I work with a lot of senior teams around the world, and there is no trust at the highest level of organizations. So that's another one that's very tricky. And align. Align means that they are in agreement to march towards that vision. It's not only my vision, but it's shared among the senior team. So that one takes a long time. And that's one of the reasons why many organizational culture change initiatives fail. There is no alignment, there is no trust, there is no dialogue among the senior team. The next thing is consistent communication down. That everybody does that. And then leading by example. Another one that many times it's forgotten. So we say, yeah, we want people to change, but when it's me that I need to lead with the example of, if it was empowerment or whatever it was, I don't maybe know how to do it. I'm not doing it. And then the rest is more like middle management starts believing it, middle management fully believes it, and really the change is irreversible when critical mass has adopted the change. And it's about 70%. If 25% wants to resist, that's okay. They will end up changing or leaving. But 75%, it's not a magic number. It could be 78. But something like that of people change, then the change is irreversible. Yeah? Makes sense? The key point here is these two things I mentioned. Dialogue, trust, and alignment of the SLT plus leading by example of this model. Okay? The last thing, the last model I want to talk about is, even if you do this dialogue, this trust, this communication, this leading by example, at the end, you'll need to come up with a number of change initiatives or work streams, people working across the organization about pushing that change to happen. And the next model talks about organizing all the initiatives into 4 quadrants to make sure that the change effort is most successful. And these 4 quadrants I divided between individual change and organizational change. So initiatives that touch the individual and initiatives that touch the organization as a collective. And we need to do both. A lot of times, people focus on the collective, assuming the individual will change. So you need to pay attention as well to the individual. That's the point of this axis. The other axis is hard versus soft change. Hard change is structured change, pay incentives. I'll put some other examples in a second. Soft change is the change of my attitude, maybe my values. This is very difficult. It's more the inside-out change. The outside-in change is the McKinsey change, the one that is changing processes and structure. And then you assume people will change, but a lot of times they will not change. Let me put you an example so you understand. In the intersection of these 4 quadrants, you have hard and individual, you have hard and organizational, soft and individual, soft and organizational. And so hard and individual are things like approval levels. So if you want, for instance, to improve empowerment, as we said before, one of the things you can do is give more responsibility in terms of budget to people. It's just one example. This is something that the SLT, the senior team, creates. Something that you could change at an organizational level, but still being hard, meaning structure processes, are the new org chart. That's a typical one. If you change the reporting structure, instead of organizing by business units, all of a sudden you have corporate functions and everybody report to the corporate, or everybody reports to sales, and whatever you do, that's a hard and organizational change. You have other changes you could do there. Soft and individual, an example could be coaching, something that helps the individual change from the inside out. So executive coaching or leadership development programs could be there. And in the last one, soft and organizational, it's how do you create a community that keeps talking about the challenges of change. So forums, encounters to talk about basically how we are changing as an organization. And the point of this model is you need initiatives in each one of the quadrants for the change to be more successful. Again, remember to reduce that 70% of failure into a lower number, to have bigger chances of success. So just to finish, you have the initiatives that's basically typically you put it into who's the owner and what's the budget and what's the timeline and what are the deliverables. And so you have them organized in these quadrants, but at the end, you need to have some sort of structure to give continuity to that change initiative. Communicate, communicate, communicate. I mentioned that's what most consultants would say in terms of change is true. But what and how? We talk about, there's another model here, talks about the 4 P's of change: purpose, picture, plan, and part. Purpose is what we talked about before, is the dissatisfaction, so the compelling reason for change. There needs to be a compelling reason for change. It's not because I want to change. It's because there needs to be a change. Picture, what's the vision of the future? We talked about that. It's very important to have a vision of the future. Plan, very important to have a very first step, something you can celebrate successes quickly and often, instead of putting very big goals that are people are going to get tired. And then what's my part in it? Make sure you help people understand what can you do to help us change. What's your role in this whole thing? And one more thing before finishing is a lot of times change agents focus on what needs to be changed. And many times we neglect to say what is not changing. A lot of times, even when we change an organization, there is a lot of things that are not going to change. And people need some reassurance that some things are not changing to just stay committed to the things that will be changing. That's it. Thank you very much. I'm going to open it up to